Some debts can't be paid with money. Some wounds don't heal with time. And sometimes the person who saves your life becomes the stranger you destroy without ever knowing their name. The rain was falling the night everything changed, not the gentle kind that waters gardens, but the violent kind that drowns dreams and buries truth 6 feet under lies. In a small Vermont town where everyone knows everyone, a man walks into a bakery desperate for work, carrying secrets heavier than the flour sacks he'll soon lift. Behind the counter stands a woman who spent 8 years running from a ghost. She doesn't know she's looking at him. He doesn't know she's the reason he lost everything once before. But fate has a way of collecting what's owed. And in a world where one moment of courage can echo across decades, where family sins pass down like inherited scars, some encounters are written in blood and forgiveness long before the first word is spoken. The collision is coming. The reckoning has already begun. The October wind cut through David Thompson's worn jacket like a knife as he walked down Main Street in Millbrook, Vermont. At 48, he'd never imagined he'd be job hunting again. But life had a way of rewriting plans when you least expected it. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves, reminders that winter was coming, whether he was ready or not. His boots echoed against the cobblestones as he approached the Golden Wheat Bakery, its warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk like honey. Through the fog-kissed windows, he could see someone moving inside, probably preparing for the morning rush. A hand-painted sign in the corner of the glass read, "Help wanted, no experience necessary." David paused, running a calloused hand through his graying hair. He knew nothing about baking beyond the frozen waffles he heated up for Emma's breakfast. But desperation had a way of making unlikely options seem reasonable. 6 months without work had drained their savings, and his 12-year-old daughter deserved better than watching her father slowly fall apart. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the intoxicating aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon. Behind the counter, a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun looked up from the dough she was kneading. Her hands were dusted with flour, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the ovens. "We're not open for another hour," she said gently, then noticed his nervous posture. "But if you're here about the job—" "I am." David cleared his throat. "I know I don't look like baker material, but I'm willing to learn. I'm dependable. I show up on time, and I need the work." Something in his voice made her pause. She studied his face with kind but careful eyes, as if she were trying to place him. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is my place." David Thompson." He extended his hand, and when their fingers touched, something familiar stirred in both of them, a recognition neither could quite name. "Have we met before?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing slightly. David searched her face. There was something about her eyes, something that tugged at a memory just out of reach. "I don't think so. I'd remember." Sarah nodded slowly, but the feeling lingered. "Tell me about yourself." "David, I'm a single dad. My daughter Emma is 12, and she's everything to me." His voice softened when he mentioned her name. "I worked as a mechanic for 20 years until the garage closed down. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I learned fast." "What happened to your wife?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop herself. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "Cancer," David said simply. "3 years ago. It's been just Emma and me since then." Sarah's expression softened. She knew something about loss, about starting over when life pulled the rug out from under you. "The job pays 15 an hour to start. Early mornings. We begin prep at 5. Think you can handle that?" "I can handle whatever you need me to handle." "Can you start tomorrow?" David blinked, surprised by the quick decision. "Just like that," Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months, something in David's chest loosened. Sometimes you just know when something feels right. As David walked home through the fallen leaves, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a job. Something about Sarah Mitchell felt like the beginning of something he hadn't dared to hope for. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., but David was already awake. He'd barely slept, nervous energy keeping him tossing and turning. In the kitchen, he left a note for Emma next to her cereal bowl. "First day at the bakery. Wish me luck. Love. Dad." The streets of Millbrook were dark and quiet as he made his way to Golden Wheat. Sarah was already there, her silhouette moving efficiently through the pre-dawn ritual of preparing for another day. She looked up when he entered, offering a small smile. "Coffee's fresh," she said, nodding toward a pot in the corner. "You'll need it." The next few hours passed in a blur of instruction and fumbling attempts. Sarah showed him how to measure flour properly, how to tell when dough had been kneaded enough, how to shape loaves without deflating them. David's hands, so sure with engine parts and tools, felt clumsy and uncertain with the delicate pastry work. "Don't force it," Sarah said, watching him struggle with a batch of croissants. "Bread responds to patience, not pressure." "Like people," David muttered, then looked up, embarrassed. "Sorry, thinking out loud." "No, you're right." Sarah's hand stilled for a moment. "People and bread have more in common than you'd think. Both need time to rise. Both can be damaged if you're too rough with them." Their eyes met across the work surface, and again, that familiar feeling passed between them. David was the first to look away, focusing intently on his misshapen pastries. By 7 a.m., the bakery was filled with the morning crowd. David watched Sarah interact with her customers, the elderly man who came in every day for 2 rye rolls, the young mother who always bought extra muffins for her twin boys, the businessman who needed his coffee black and his Danish warm. She knew them all by name, remembered their preferences, asked about their families. "You've built something special here," David said during a brief lull. "It wasn't easy," Sarah replied, refilling the pastry case. "When I first moved to Millbrook, I didn't know a soul, but this place, it became my anchor." "Where did you move from? Boston?" "I was an accountant there for 15 years. Different life entirely." What made you change?" Sarah's hands paused in their work. "Sometimes life forces you to change. Sometimes you realize what you thought you wanted wasn't what you needed at all." David sensed there was more to the story, but something in her tone warned him not to push. They worked in comfortable silence until Emma appeared at the front door, her backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks pink from the cool morning air. "Dad," she called out, then caught herself, suddenly shy in front of Sarah. "Emma, come meet Sarah," David said, his face lighting up. "Sarah, this is my daughter." Emma stepped forward, offering a polite smile. "It smells amazing in here." "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah said, and David noticed how naturally the endearment came. "Would you like to try a cinnamon roll fresh from the oven?" Emma's eyes widened. "Can I, Dad?" "Of course." As Sarah handed Emma the pastry, their fingers brushed, and Emma looked up at her with sudden intensity. "You have sad eyes," she said with the brutal honesty of a 12-year-old. Sarah blinked, taken aback. "Do I?" "Yeah, but they're getting happier. Like when you look at my dad." David felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Emma, what?" "It's true." Emma took a bite of the cinnamon roll, and her expression transformed into pure bliss. "Oh my God, this is incredible." "Language," David warned, but he was smiling. "Sorry." "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." Emma turned to Sarah. "Are you going to teach my dad to make these?" "I'm going to try," Sarah said, glancing at David. "Though he might need some patience with the process. Dad's really good at fixing things," Emma said loyally. "He fixed my bike when everyone said it was totally broken, and he built me a treehouse last summer, even though he'd never built one before." "Sounds like he's a man who doesn't give up easily," Sarah said, and David felt something warm unfurl in his chest at the approval in her voice. 3 weeks into the job, David had settled into the rhythm of early mornings and flour-dusted aprons. His croissants were still lopsided, but his bread was improving, and Sarah had started trusting him with more complex tasks. The work was satisfying in a way he hadn't expected, creative and nurturing in ways that fixing engines had never been. It was a Tuesday morning when the recognition hit. Sarah was telling him about the time she'd been in a car accident, how it had changed her perspective on life. When she mentioned the date October 15th, 8 years ago, David's hands stilled on the dough he'd been kneading. What did you say? October 15th, 2016. I was driving back to Boston from visiting my parents when I hit a patch of ice on I-89. Car flipped 3 times before it stopped. David's heart began to race. He remembered that night with crystal clarity. The rain, the twisted metal, the woman trapped inside the burning car. The woman whose life he'd saved before disappearing into the night. Afraid of the questions that would come? You were driving a blue Honda, he said quietly. Sarah looked up, startled. How did you? You were wearing a gray sweater. You kept asking if I was hurt, even though you were bleeding from a gash on your forehead. Sarah's face went white. She set down the mixing bowl with trembling hands. That was you. I pulled you out through the passenger side window. The driver's door was crushed. David's voice was barely above a whisper. You were unconscious when the paramedics arrived. I left before they could ask questions. Why didn't you stay? David looked away. I'd just gone through a messy divorce. I was afraid if I got involved with an accident scene, there might be complications. I was a coward. You saved my life. Sarah's voice broke. I looked for you for months. I wanted to thank you, to find out if you were okay. You had blood on your hands from breaking the window. David held up his right hand, where a thin scar ran across his palm. It healed. They stared at each other across the work surface, the air between them charged with the weight of revelation. 8 years ago, they'd been strangers whose lives intersected for a handful of minutes. Now, here they were, flower in their hair and feelings growing between them that neither had expected. This can't be a coincidence, Sarah whispered. Maybe it's not supposed to be, David replied. Sarah walked around the counter until she was standing directly in front of him. Without hesitation, she reached up and cupped his face in her flour-dusted hands. Thank you, she said. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for giving me a job when I needed one most. They might have kissed then, if the front door hadn't chimed and the morning rush hadn't begun. But the moment hung between them, full of possibility and the strange workings of fate. The revelation that they'd met before changed the dynamic between David and Sarah. The awkward politeness was replaced by something deeper, more electric. They found excuses to brush past each other in the small kitchen. Their conversations became more personal, and Emma started asking pointed questions about when Sarah was going to come to dinner. It was during one of these dinners, 2 weeks after the recognition, that the second twist revealed itself. Sarah had finally accepted Emma's persistent invitations and was sitting at their small kitchen table, helping Emma with her math homework while David finished cooking. The domesticity of it felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. What's your last name again? Emma asked, erasing a wrong answer for the 3rd time. Mitchell, Sarah said. Sarah Mitchell. David dropped the spatula he'd been holding. It clattered against the stove, startling them both. Dad, you okay? Emma looked concerned. Mitchell, David repeated slowly. Your father? Was his name Robert? Sarah's pencil stilled. Yes. How did you know that? David sank into the chair across from her, his face pale. I worked for your father, 15 years ago, at Mitchell's Auto Repair. That's impossible. Dad never mentioned anyone named David Thompson. He wouldn't have, David said bitterly. He fired me, accused me of stealing money from the till. Sarah's eyes widened. What? $2,000 went missing over the course of a month. Your father was convinced it was me because I was the newest employee, the one with a new baby and bills to pay. He called me into his office, accused me of theft, and fired me on the spot. No proof, just suspicion. But Dad wasn't like that. He was fair, honest. Maybe he was, most of the time, but not with me. David's voice was tight with old pain. I couldn't find work for 3 months after that. Word gets around in a small industry. I had to move to Burlington just to find someone willing to hire me. Sarah sat back in her chair, reeling. I don't understand. If you didn't take the money, then who? I found out later it was Frank Peterson, the bookkeeper. He'd been skimming for months. But by then, the damage was done. Your father never apologized, never tried to make it right. Emma looked between them, her homework forgotten. Does this mean Sarah can't come to dinner anymore? No, sweetheart, David said quickly. This has nothing to do with Sarah. It was between me and her father. But Sarah was already standing, gathering her purse. I should go. Sarah, wait. I need to think about this. Her voice was strained. I need to. I'll see you tomorrow. She left quickly, and David was left staring at the closed door, wondering if the sins of the father were about to destroy something beautiful before it had a chance to begin. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about David's story, about the man she thought she knew as her father. Robert Mitchell had always been her hero, honest, hardworking, fair to his employees. The idea that he could have falsely accused someone, ruined their livelihood without proof, seemed impossible. But the pain in David's eyes had been real. The next morning, she arrived at the bakery before David, needing time to think. She threw herself into the morning prep, trying to lose herself in the familiar motions of measuring and mixing. But her mind kept wandering to the storage room upstairs, where she'd kept her father's belongings after he'd passed away 5 years ago. When David arrived, they worked in uncomfortable silence. The easy camaraderie of the past weeks was gone, replaced by the weight of history and hurt feelings. It wasn't until the lunch rush was over that Sarah finally spoke. I'm going upstairs to look through my father's things, she said. I need to know the truth. David nodded. Do you want me to come with you? No, I need to do this alone. The storage room was dusty and filled with boxes labeled in her mother's careful handwriting. Sarah found the one marked Robert's office and opened it with trembling hands. Inside were files, awards, and personal items from the garage her father had run for 30 years. At the bottom of the box, she found a manila envelope marked Personal Private. Inside were letters, some business correspondence, and a stack of papers held together with a rubber band. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the letterhead Thompson, David, employment file. With shaking hands, she opened the file. There was David's application, his employment record, and at the bottom, a letter in David's handwriting dated 3 weeks after he'd been fired. Mr. Mitchell, I am writing to inform you that Frank Peterson has confessed to taking the money from the till. He admitted to me yesterday that he has been stealing small amounts for months to cover gambling debts. I have enclosed his signed confession. I do not expect an apology, but I thought you should know that an innocent man was falsely accused. I hope you will take appropriate action to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Sincerely, David Thompson. Attached was indeed a signed confession from Frank Peterson, admitting to the theft and exonerating David completely. Sarah sank to her knees, the papers scattered around her. Her father had known. He'd known David was innocent, and he'd never done anything about it. Never called to apologize, never tried to make amends, never even bothered to spread the word that David had been wrongly accused. At the bottom of the envelope was one more item, a draft of a letter her father had apparently never sent. David, I received your letter and Frank's confession. I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for the accusations I made. You were a good employee and a good man, and I let my fears and prejudices cloud my judgment. I know an apology cannot undo the damage I've caused to your reputation and your livelihood, but please know that I regret my actions deeply. If there is anything I can do to make this right. The letter was unfinished, never sent. Sarah's father had written it, felt guilty about it, but had been too proud or too ashamed to follow through. Sarah gathered the papers and walked downstairs with heavy steps. David was cleaning the ovens, his movements methodical and careful. He looked up when she entered, and his expression grew concerned when he saw her tear-stained face. He knew, she said simply. holding out the papers. He knew you were innocent, and he never apologized, never tried to make it right. David read the letters in silence, his jaw tightening with each word. When he finished, he set them down gently on the counter. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "I'm so sorry for what he did to you. It wasn't your fault, but it was my family, my father, and I need to make it right." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I don't know how, but I need to make it right." David studied her face, seeing the determination there, the integrity that her father had possessed but failed to act upon. "You already have," he said softly, "by finding the truth, by caring enough to look." They stood there in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the scent of bread and forgiveness. And Sarah realized that some wounds could heal across generations if you were brave enough to let them. The weeks following the revelation brought David and Sarah closer together. The shared knowledge of their connected past, the understanding of old wounds and their healing, created an intimacy that surprised them both. David found himself staying later each day, helping Sarah with the evening cleanup and inventory. Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way David listened with his whole attention, to the gentle way he spoke about his late wife and his dreams for Emma's future. Emma had become a regular fixture at the bakery after school, doing homework at one of the small tables while the adults worked. She'd appointed herself unofficial taste tester and customer greeter, and Sarah was charmed by the girl's easy confidence and sharp wit. "Are you going to marry my dad?" Emma asked one afternoon, with the casual directness that only children possess. Sarah nearly dropped the mixing bowl she was carrying. "Emma, what it's a reasonable question. You guys look at each other all googly-eyed, and Dad hums while he works now. He never used to hum." David, who had heard the exchange from the back room, appeared in the doorway with flour in his hair and embarrassment on his face. "Emma, you can't just ask people things like that." "Why not? I like Sarah. She makes you happy. She makes really good cookies. And she doesn't treat me like I'm a little kid." Emma ticked off the points on her fingers. "Seems like good marriage material to me." Sarah burst out laughing. "Well, when you put it like that, see?" Emma grinned triumphantly. "She's not saying no." That evening, after Emma had gone home to finish her homework, David and Sarah found themselves alone in the bakery for the first time in weeks. The October sun was setting early, casting golden light through the windows and giving everything a warm, romantic glow. "I should apologize for Emma," David said, wiping down the last of the tables. "She doesn't have much of a filter. I like that about her. She says what she means." Sarah was counting the day's receipts, but her attention was more on David than on the numbers. "Besides, she's not wrong about the googly eyes." David looked up sharply. "Is that so?" "Mmm." Sarah set down the calculator and walked over to where he stood. "I've been doing my share of googly-eyed looking too." They were standing close now, close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in David's brown eyes, close enough that he could count the freckles across her nose. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. "Sarah," David said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes, I haven't felt this way about anyone since Margaret died. I didn't think I ever would again." "I've never felt this way about anyone," Sarah admitted. "Not even close." David reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his touch gentle and sure. "Is that scary for you?" "Terrifying," she said with a laugh. "But the good kind of terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you're about to fly." When they kissed, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. It tasted like cinnamon and hope and the beginning of something beautiful. Their peaceful bubble burst on a Tuesday morning in November when a black sedan pulled up outside Golden Wheat Bakery. Sarah was in the back room, but David could see through the pass-through window as a man in an expensive suit stepped out of the car and approached the front door. Daniel Brooks looked exactly like what he was, a successful Boston attorney who'd never been told no. Tall, silver-haired, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. David felt an instant dislike as the man surveyed the bakery with barely concealed disdain. "Sarah," Daniel called out as he entered, his voice carrying the tone of someone who expected immediate attention. "There you are." Sarah emerged from the back room, and David watched her face go through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been dread. "Daniel, what are you doing here? Can't a man visit his ex-fiancée without an interrogation?" Daniel's smile was smooth and practiced. "Though I have to say, this is quite a change from your corner office in Boston." Ex-fiancée. David felt his stomach drop. Sarah had never mentioned being engaged. "We need to talk," Daniel continued, then noticed David for the first time. His eyes took in the flour-dusted apron, the working man's hands, the protective stance David had unconsciously adopted. "Privately, anything you have to say, you can say in front of David," Sarah said, her voice cool. "He works here." "I can see that." Daniel's tone suggested he could see quite a lot more than that. "Sarah, I have a proposition for you. A very generous one." He pulled out a leather portfolio and extracted a document. "Holbrook Development wants to buy your building. They're planning a boutique shopping complex for this block. Very upscale. They're offering 3 times what this place is worth." Sarah glanced at the figure on the paper, and her eyes widened despite herself. "This is life-changing money," Daniel finished. "Enough to come back to Boston, start fresh. We could pick up where we left off." David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The offer was substantial enough that Sarah would be crazy not to consider it, and the way Daniel was looking at her, the possessive confidence in his posture, made it clear this wasn't just about business. "I don't understand," Sarah said slowly. "Why would you be involved in this?" "Because I care about you. Because I made a mistake 8 years ago when I let you go, and I want to make it right." Daniel stepped closer to her, invading her personal space in a way that made David's hands clench into fists. "You were meant for bigger things than this. Sarah, come home." Sarah looked at the document, then at Daniel, then at David. The silence stretched uncomfortably until the front door chimed and Emma bounced in, her cheeks red from the cold. "Hi, Sarah." "Hi, Dad, I got an A on my math test and Mrs. Henderson said—" She stopped short when she noticed the tension in the room. "Oh, sorry, should I come back later?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah said quickly. "Come here. Let me see that test." But Daniel was already moving toward the door. "Think about it. Sarah, really think about it. This kind of opportunity doesn't come along twice." He paused at the threshold. "I'll be at the Millbrook Inn until Thursday. Call me." After he left, the bakery felt too small and too quiet. Emma looked between Sarah and David with the perceptive eyes of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions early. "Who was that?" she asked. "Someone from my past," Sarah said carefully. "Are you going to sell the bakery?" Emma's voice was small, worried. Sarah looked at David, but his expression was carefully neutral. "I don't know, sweetheart. I need to think about it." Emma nodded solemnly, then went to her usual table to start her homework, but David could see the worry in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing up at Sarah as if afraid she might disappear. That evening, after Emma had gone home, David and Sarah closed the bakery in tense silence. Finally, Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. "You're angry with me." "I'm not angry," David said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "I'm just trying to understand why you never mentioned being engaged." "It was a long time ago, before the accident. But after the accident, he left you." Sarah's silence was confirmation enough. "So now he's back, offering you everything you used to want, your old life, but better." David hung up his apron with perhaps more force than necessary. "Seems like an easy choice." "Is it?" Sarah's voice was sharp. "You're just going to decide for me what I want." "I'm not deciding anything. I'm just recognizing reality. This is a small-town bakery that barely breaks even. He's offering you enough money to never have to worry about anything again, plus a chance to go back to the life you're used to. What if I don't want that life anymore? Then you're luckier than most people, because you get to choose. David picked up his jacket. Not everyone gets offered a way out when things get complicated. He left without saying goodbye, and Sarah stood alone in her bakery, surrounded by the scent of tomorrow's bread and the weight of an impossible decision. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday. David was in the middle of shaping dinner rolls when his phone buzzed against his hip. The number belonged to Millbrook Elementary, and his heart immediately shifted into panic mode. Mr. Thompson, this is Principal Martinez. Emma's been in an accident. The rolling pin slipped from David's suddenly nerveless fingers. What kind of accident? Is she okay? She was hit by a car while riding her bike home from school. She's conscious, but the paramedics want to take her to Burlington Medical Center as a precaution. Can you meet us there? David was already yanking off his apron, his hands shaking. I'm on my way. David, Sarah appeared at his elbow, concern written across her face. What's wrong? Emma, car accident. I have to. He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm coming with you, Sarah repeated firmly. She was already turning off ovens and grabbing her keys. We'll take my car. You're in no shape to drive. The drive to Burlington was the longest 45 minutes of David's life. Sarah drove with calm efficiency while David sat rigid in the passenger seat, his mind cycling through every worst-case scenario. She didn't try to offer empty reassurances or fill the silence with nervous chatter. She just drove, one hand on the wheel and the other occasionally reaching over to squeeze his arm. They found Emma in the emergency room, looking impossibly small on the adult-sized gurney. Her left leg was in a temporary splint, and there was a bandage on her forehead. But she was awake and arguing with the nurse about whether she really needed to stay overnight for observation. Dad! Emma's face lit up when she saw him, then crumpled slightly. I'm sorry. I know I'm supposed to be more careful, but this car came out of nowhere and… Shh, baby girl, you don't need to apologize. David gathered her into his arms as carefully as he could manage. Are you okay? Does anything hurt? My leg's weird, and my head feels fuzzy, but I'm okay. The doctor said it's just a broken bone and a concussion. Emma looked past her father to where Sarah stood in the doorway. You came too. Of course I came. Sarah stepped closer to the bed. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Like I got hit by a car, Emma said with a weak attempt at humor. Then her expression grew serious. The lady who was with me when the ambulance came, was that you? Sarah and David exchanged confused glances. What lady? David asked. She had reddish hair like Sarah's, and she kept talking to me, keeping me awake. She knew how to stop the bleeding from my head, and she made sure I didn't move my neck. Emma looked directly at Sarah. It was you, wasn't it? Sarah's face had gone pale. Emma, I've been at the bakery all day. But the nurse said the woman who stayed with me until the ambulance came saved my life. She said if I'd lost consciousness with that head injury… Emma's voice trailed off as she studied Sarah's face. If it wasn't you, then who? The nurse who'd been adjusting Emma's IV spoke up. The woman who helped your daughter was remarkable. She seemed to know exactly what to do. Kept her conscious, controlled the bleeding, immobilized her neck. When I asked if she had medical training, she said she'd learned it the hard way. Sarah sank into the chair beside Emma's bed, understanding dawning in her eyes. What did she look like? About your height, reddish-brown hair, maybe 45. She was wearing a green jacket and jeans. Kind eyes, but sad, like she'd seen some hard things. David was studying Sarah's face, seeing recognition there. You know who it was. I think… Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I think it was my sister. You have a sister. Emma perked up despite her injuries. Had a sister. Sarah's hands were trembling. Lisa. She was 2 years older than me. She died in a car accident when I was 28. The room fell silent except for the beeping of medical equipment. David reached for Sarah's hand, finding it ice cold. "That's impossible," he said gently. "Is it?" Sarah looked at him with eyes that held wonder and grief in equal measure. "Emma, can you describe exactly what happened? Everything you remember." Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. "I was riding my bike on Maple Street, the way I always do. This car ran the stop sign and hit me. I remember flying through the air, and then I was on the ground, and everything hurt. I was really scared, and I think I was going to close my eyes and go to sleep. But then this lady was there. What did she say to you? She told me to stay awake, that help was coming. She put something soft under my head and pressed something against the cut to stop the bleeding. And she kept talking to me about Sarah." David felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "What about Sarah?" "She said Sarah was special, that she'd been through something like this and survived. She said Sarah would take good care of me and my dad." Emma opened her eyes and looked directly at Sarah. "She said Sarah was meant to be part of our family." Sarah started crying then, quiet tears that spoke of grief and gratitude and something that might have been peace. David pulled her into his arms, and Emma reached out to take her hand. "I don't understand what happened today," David said quietly. "But I know Emma's alive because someone was there to help her. Someone who cared enough to stay. Someone who wanted us to know," Sarah whispered, "that some connections go deeper than life and death." They stayed at the hospital until Emma was released the next afternoon, with a cast on her leg and strict instructions to take it easy for the next 6 weeks. The drive home was quieter than the frantic trip up, filled with the exhausted relief that comes after a crisis passes. "Sarah!" Emma spoke up from the back seat, where she was propped up with pillows. "Are you still thinking about selling the bakery?" Sarah met David's eyes in the rearview mirror. "What makes you ask that?" "The fancy man who came to see you. I heard him talking about money in Boston." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact. "But if my guardian angel lady was right, and you're supposed to be part of our family, then you can't move to Boston." "Guardian angel lady," David repeated. "That's what I'm calling her. The lady who saved me." Emma shifted carefully in her seat. "I think she was trying to tell us something important." Sarah pulled into the driveway of David's house and turned off the engine. In the sudden quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the decision she'd been avoiding. "I need to tell you both something," she said slowly. "Daniel offered me 3 times what the bakery is worth. Enough money to set all of us up for life." Emma's face fell. "So you are leaving?" "I thought about it," Sarah admitted. "For about 5 minutes. I thought about what that money could mean. The security, the opportunities." Where David's voice was carefully neutral. Sarah turned to face them both, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "But money can't buy what we have. It can't buy the way Emma lights up when she sees me, or the way you hum while you work, or the feeling of belonging somewhere for the first time in my life." "So you're staying?" Emma's voice was full of hope. "I'm staying. If you'll have me." David leaned over and kissed her softly. "That's the easiest question I've ever been asked." 2 weeks after Emma's accident, David made a discovery that changed everything. He was helping Sarah organize the bakery's financial records, preparing to officially refuse Daniel's offer, when he noticed something odd in the accounts. "Sarah, what's this payment for?" He pointed to a substantial deposit that had appeared in the bakery's account the week before. Sarah frowned, looking at the entry. "I don't know. I didn't make any deposits that large." She called the bank, and after several minutes of hold music and transfers, she hung up with a puzzled expression. It was a cashier's check, anonymous donor, paid off the outstanding balance on the building's mortgage. How much was that? $37,000. David felt the blood drain from his face. That was almost exactly the amount he'd had in his savings account. The life insurance money from Margaret's death that he'd been saving to buy a house for Emma. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to check something." His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and called his bank. The conversation was brief, and when he hung up, Sarah was staring at him with dawning understanding. You paid off my mortgage. Yes, with your life insurance money. The money you were saving for Emma's future. Yes. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. David, why would you? That money was for Emma, for her college, for your future together. That money was meant to give us security, David said quietly. But what good is security if we're not together? If you lose the bakery and move to Boston, all the money in the world won't matter. But it's not just your money to spend. It's Emma's inheritance from her mother. Emma doesn't need an inheritance. She needs a family. She needs you. David sat across from Sarah, taking her hands in his. Margaret would understand. She'd want Emma to be happy, to be loved. And Emma loves you. This is too much. I can't accept this. You already have. The payment's been processed. Sarah stared at him, tears streaming down her face. You gave up everything for me. For us. I gave up money. That's not everything. Everything is sitting right here in this bakery, with flour in her hair and stubborn opinions about proper frosting techniques. Sarah laughed despite her tears. You're insane. Probably, but I'm also completely, desperately in love with you. David's voice was steady. Sure. I want to marry you. Sarah, I want Emma to have the mother she deserves. I want to grow old with you in this bakery, teaching our grandchildren how to knead bread properly. Our grandchildren. Well, Emma's grandchildren. But if you're my wife, they'll be ours too. Sarah looked around the bakery. Their bakery now, mortgage-free thanks to David's sacrifice. She thought about the offer still sitting on her desk, about the security and prestige it represented. Then she thought about Emma's laughter, about David's hands covered in flour, about the way the morning light looked when it streamed through the windows while they worked side by side. Yes, she said simply. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes to growing old together. Yes to grandchildren and flower fights and whatever comes next. Sarah stood up and kissed him thoroughly, tasting like cinnamon and hope and home. But David, yeah, next time you want to make a grand romantic gesture, maybe discuss it with me first. $37,000 is a pretty big gesture. David grinned. I'll keep that in mind for the next time I need to save the woman I love from making a terrible mistake. The only terrible mistake would have been letting you get away. 1 year later, Golden Wheat Bakery was bustling with more activity than it had ever seen. Sarah and David had expanded into catering, and word of their wedding cakes had spread throughout Vermont. More importantly, they'd created something neither had expected: a true family. Emma, now 13 and walking without even a trace of a limp, had become the bakery's unofficial assistant manager. She could ice cupcakes with professional precision and had strong opinions about flavor combinations that customers had learned to respect. On this particular October morning, exactly 2 years since David had first walked through the bakery door, they were preparing for their wedding reception. The ceremony had been small, held in the town square with half of Millbrook in attendance. Emma had walked Sarah down the aisle, her cast decorated with flowers drawn by her classmates. Are you sure we have enough cake? Emma asked for the 5th time, surveying the 3-tiered creation they'd spent all week perfecting. We have enough cake to feed half the state, David assured her, straightening his tie. Relax, kiddo. Everything's perfect. It has to be perfect. This is Sarah's first wedding. And your dad's second, Sarah added, appearing from the back room in her simple ivory dress. Which means we know what we're doing. David looked at his wife, and felt the same wonder he'd experienced every day for the past year. You're beautiful. You're not bad yourself. Sarah straightened his tie, a gesture so familiar and domestic it made Emma grin. Okay, you two can be gross later. The guests are starting to arrive. Through the front window, they could see neighbors and friends gathering in the street. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop, who'd appointed herself the unofficial wedding coordinator. Tom Harrison, who ran the hardware store and had become David's closest friend. Dr. Chen, who treated Emma after her accident and had since become a regular customer. And standing at the edge of the crowd, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit, was Daniel Brooks. Sarah noticed him at the same time David did. "I can ask him to leave," David said quietly. "No, he came to wish us well." That took courage. Sarah watched as Daniel approached the bakery, his expression carefully neutral. "Congratulations," he said when he reached them, his voice sincere. "I wanted to apologize for how I handled things last year. I was selfish and presumptuous." "Thank you," Sarah said graciously. "That means a lot." Daniel looked around the bustling bakery, at the community gathered to celebrate, at the obvious happiness radiating from the family in front of him. "I think I understand now why you chose this. It's not about the money or the prestige. It's about belonging somewhere. It's about being home," Sarah agreed. After Daniel left, the celebration began in earnest. The wedding cake was indeed perfect. The speeches were heartfelt without being overly sentimental. And when David and Sarah danced their first dance as husband and wife to At Last, playing from Emma's carefully curated playlist, everyone agreed it was exactly what a wedding should be. Late that evening, after the last guest had gone home and the bakery had been cleaned and reset for the next day's business, the three of them sat on the back porch with mugs of hot chocolate and slices of leftover cake. "So," Emma said, swinging her legs from her perch on the porch rail, "what's next?" David and Sarah exchanged glances. They'd been waiting for the right moment to share their news. "Well," Sarah said carefully, "we were thinking it might be nice to add another room to the house." "Why, the house is fine." "A nursery," David said gently. "For a baby." Emma's eyes widened. "A baby? Are you pregnant?" "Not yet," Sarah laughed. "But we're hoping. Would that be okay with you?" Emma considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd learned early that family was precious and fragile. "Will you still have time for me?" "Always," Sarah said firmly. "You're not just my stepdaughter, Emma. You're my daughter in every way that matters. Nothing will ever change that." "And a baby would be pretty cool," Emma admitted. "I could teach it to ice cupcakes." "Maybe wait until they can hold their head up," David suggested dryly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear over Millbrook. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, but the porch was warm with the glow of the kitchen windows and the presence of family. "You know what I think," Emma said eventually. "What's that?" "I think my guardian angel lady knew exactly what she was doing when she brought us together." Sarah reached over and squeezed Emma's hand. "I think you're right." "I think," David added, pulling both his girls closer, "we're exactly where we're supposed to be." In the distance, a church bell chimed 10 o'clock, marking the end of one day and the beginning of countless others. In the Golden Wheat Bakery, tomorrow's bread was already rising, patient and steady in the warm darkness, ready to nourish their community for another day. Some stories end with dramatic revelations or grand gestures, but the best stories, the ones that last, end with the quiet certainty of love that's been tested and proven true. They end with family gathered close, with work that matters, and with the simple, profound knowledge that home is not a place, but a feeling. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they end with the promise of more stories to come. In the end, it wasn't money that bought their freedom. It wasn't luck that brought them together. It was the quiet courage to believe that broken things could be made whole again. David lost his life savings, $37,000 meant for his daughter's future. But he gained something no amount of money could purchase: a family forged not by blood, but by choice. Sarah walked away from a fortune in Boston real estate, trading security for something far more precious: a place where she finally belonged. The scars remain, the memories of that rainy night 8 years ago, the sting of false accusations, the weight of family secrets buried too long. But scars, as any survivor knows, are simply proof that healing is possible. Sometimes the universe orchestrates meetings that seem impossible. A hero saves a stranger, only to unknowingly enter her father's world of betrayal. Years later, desperation drives him to her door, where flour and forgiveness write a different ending than either expected. In a small Vermont bakery where bread rises every morning at dawn, Three Hearts learned that the most powerful force isn't fate or coincidence, it's the willingness to love again after loss. What would you risk to save the people who saved you?